Praying in the Midst of Life, led by Ron Delbane, Episcopal priest, leader of workshops and retreats, popular author, spiritual director. He's been teaching people to pray for over 30 years.
Many of us believe that it's up to us to pray in a way that reaches God. I believe we are in the presence of God at all times, and prayer is being attentive to that presence. For you, is the only meaning of the word retreat backing off when the enemy attacks? Are there times when you would like to get away for a time of refreshment? Do you ever feel a call from God to just go and be alone? You know, we just can't keep on going. Some other people and myself have found some ways to stop and take time in the midst of our daily life. I'd like to explore some of those ways with you. Although it's not the easiest, one of the times that we might begin to look at is the annual vacation. When you take your vacation, do you take time to stop? Perhaps like me, there have been times on the last day when you've made the comment, "Oh, I need to get home to rest from this vacation." That says something about our culture and our values, doesn't it? What is it that says we always have to be working, even though we're on vacation? But I suspect, too, there have been those times when, on your vacation, in your time of recreation, there have been moments when you have broken through and seen God's presence in the midst of all of that. Those are the keys, that attentiveness, those attentive times. Those are the keys of what it means to retreat in the midst of life.
I just experienced that my family reunion was this past July, and after the reunion, I got to go visit a nephew that I had not seen in 24 years, and he lives in Monterey, California, and I got to go with him and his family to Big Sur, which is very beautiful. And we really didn't set out to worship God or anything that day, but the whole day to me was just a blessed event because of what we saw and how we related to each other. And even though years had passed, we had, I guess it was like communion.
Is your life like a rubber band? Do you live your life stretched out, taut, and any time one end comes in a little bit, the other end goes right back out, so that when our life lightens up, we stretch it back out again? Well, my friends, that's what retreating is all about. It's letting that rubber band come back and be loose. Using that image, let's take a look at some words. Retreat, recreation, recall, reflection, remember. Do you notice something they all have in common? Sure, it's the prefix, re. It means again. The word again is the concept I want to talk about. Looking at the words, retreat. The word retreat comes from the Latin derivation which means to draw out or to pull away from. And so it means to draw out or pull away from again, to recreate, to recall, to call again into our minds and hearts, to reflect. The Latin root where we have the word reflection means to view, and so it means to view again, and to remember. Remember. Have you had the experience that after a particular grueling day you might say, "I feel like I've been pulled apart"? You might even say, "I feel like I've been dismembered." Well, this process to remember is a process wherein we are remade whole. Throughout the history of Christian spirituality, the concept of retreat has been expressed as one way of going away, moving out of the city, going perhaps to the forest or to the desert, to the wilderness, being prompted by God's Spirit to take time to reflect on oneself, on God, and on one's place in the midst of the world. Another way that retreats have been considered throughout all of Christian spirituality as well has been to retreat right in the midst of life, without going away physically. Most of us have heard a lot about the retreats where we go away. I'd like to spend some time talking about those retreats where we stop and take time right in the midst of life, and where we can be attentive to God right in our daily life.
It's not a daily regimen, but I find myself retiring from people. I love people. I love being in the midst of crowds. But then when I go home, I find myself being very introverted and finding a time just for me and God, or just for centering and focusing the flavor and the savor of that contemplative time.
Do you also find yourself looking for times in your life to spend Sabbath? We used to take a day off a week and call that Sabbath. Now it's important for many of us to find within our busy life some Sabbath time, that time to stop, that time to let the rubber band just come in a little bit. And so we have to find creative ways to do that in the midst of life. George is a friend of mine who works on the 5th floor of an office building. He discovered that something that helps him take Sabbath in the midst of his workday is that periodically he will leave his office, go to the stairwell, walk down 5 flights of stairs, go outside, take a couple breaths of fresh air, and walk back up the stairs to his office. He said to me, just that little bit of time, Ron, is a time for me to be aware of God's presence right here in the midst of my everyday workday. Sally is a teacher, lively class. She said sometimes things just really build up. She says, what I've discovered is that when something exciting happens in class, or I have a particular moment with a student that's meaningful to me, I write it down on a 3x5 card. She says, and I have a stack of those on my desk. She said, when things get just unbearable to me, I'll pick one up, and that's my Sabbath time, to be aware of the times when God's presence, and I've been aware of God's presence in working with one of my students. Doris said that when she goes to work, she just takes a couple extra seconds in the parking lot before she gets out of her car, just to remind herself to take Sabbath during the day. When I was director of a campus ministry center and spent time day in and day out meeting with students, I found that a Sabbath time for me was between appointments, to get up and go and wash my hands. It's a symbol of the call that I had in baptism, the call that I had to be a servant to others. What are Sabbath times that you can find in your life?
Well, I've been trying to pay more attention to what goes on in my own life, and I've found that at one time I always had my day filled, my time filled. If I rode in the car, the tapes were on and the radio was on, and everything was always filling up my head. And in the last year, I've spent more time in silence, where I don't want any distractions. I just kind of need a little time and space. And I've spent more time doing writing, journaling, and also just drawing to see what comes out of another creative mode for me. Mm-hmm. I think the way I used to think about prayer was that I had to close my eyes real tight and get out all the distractions. And there were always distractions. And if I cut out all the outside distractions, then there were still distractions in my head. and I've learned to incorporate those.
Do you do journaling every day, or is it, however things happen with you?
I try very hard to do it every day. I'm not always successful, but usually right before I go to bed. If not, as soon as I get up, I try to take some time for just silence and contemplation. Usually before I go to bed, I try to end with a prayer.
You sounded a bit guilty when you said you weren't able to do it every day.
I do feel guilty when I don't do it every day.
Guilt, guilt, guilt. How many times, I suspect you as well as me, have sounded like Garland. Just a bit guilty that we didn't do it perfectly. It was a wonderful revelation to me the day I discovered that the word we translate perfect means integrated or together. That somehow I felt then that I've had those times when I felt like I've had my life together, or that I felt comfortable and whole. Now, there are many different ways that we can be attentive to God, and remember to take your Sabbath time. It's not a time to do, but it's a time to be. Some people do find journaling very helpful. I usually share with people, if you can journal 2 or 3 times a week, fine. If you can journal 4 or 5 times a week, fine. If you can journal 7 times a week, fine. So the purpose is not to be perfect. The purpose is to be involved in a process. Barbara shared how she journaled not only in words, but also in art. Find your way to journal. Find your way to stop and take a bit of time to be attentive.
I would almost get panic attacks at the beginning of summertime with 5 children, knowing that they were all going to be there and demanding time. I decided I had to plan ahead. So we have this little side yard where there's this huge rock that the kids have always climbed on, and it's outside of the fence, and it was surrounded by this, maybe 4-foot tall group of bushes. So I dug around the rock, and I planted some flowers, and I bought a little bench, and I told the kids, I said, if you wake up and I'm not in the house, I'll be out on the bench. And during that time, please don't come out. And I would go out there in the morning. I would get up so that I knew I would be hopefully up before any of them. And I would go sit, and I took my journal with me, and I would just sit and just absorb life and then write. And it kept me sane. It kept me sane for the whole summer. And then this year, we again planted flowers around the rock, and this is a couple summers later, and I heard my son get up real early. David, I heard him go out the door, and I couldn't imagine what he was doing, so I went into the kitchen and I looked out the window, and there he is out on the bench with a book. So, and I just thought, wow, that's just really neat.
That is neat.
Yeah.
People's lives are changed by simple things, aren't they? The clearing away of a space, a bench, flowers. What are ways that you can carve out space in your life, in your office, at home? Perhaps at home, some kind of ritual can help. Some people find it helpful to open their scripture when they're going to take time. Or some go outside. Or some will find a place to sit in the sun, in the corner of a room, have a cup of tea or coffee. Where are places within your home that you can carve out that little space, that time and place where you can stop? Where in your city? A lot of times people laugh when I tell them that there are many times when I take my retreat by going to New York. One of the things I love to do is to walk the city streets and just simply look into the face of all the people who pass by, being as aware as I can be that God is as present to them as God is present to me. You can do the same thing going to the mall. An image I find helpful to use is to imagine that living water within me springing up, and as I walk and see people, it simply overflows, so that as I see someone, I simply send a blessing, being aware that we are here at this moment in history in God's presence. So there are probably times that you can find in your home, in your office, in your city, to be aware and to retreat. Let's take let's say a typical week. Out of that week, would there be, do you have any, quote, free time? Or any time that, let's say once a month, you might say, oh, I think maybe I could carve out 15 minutes, a half hour, an hour. Do you have that kind of
Sure,
time?
I could do that.
Where would you do it?
You mean physically where?
Yeah, physically where?
Well, in my home, I have a little
Okay.
meditation area where I try to get the day started, so it's a wonderful place with windows and
Okay,
nice views, so that might be
okay,
an inviting place.
okay. Well, let's just say that you were to pick that kind of time and that kind of place. Are there any special story that at this point in your life out of the scriptures kind of risen up, or maybe an image of God, or maybe some image even out of your dreams or out of your journaling that has kind of surfaced for you that you're kind of got now as your journey theme or your journey sign?
That's an interesting question. I think a theme that I am kind of ruminating on lately is this theme of life coming out of death. And that has a lot of implications in my life, a lot of different ways that works itself out. But I think the overall theme is when things die, parts of you die, or a friend dies, or parts of your marriage die, or whatever the case might be, things you have to let go of for whatever reason, that life can still come out of that. That's a theme that I've been living with.
Okay. There are many ways we can carve out, in an intentional way, times to retreat. Right where we live, right in the midst of life. Every one of us has different kinds of ways, different places, different times in our life. Whether it be a minute here, or whether it be 10 minutes here, or whether it be a day, there are times when we can stop. Our culture and our values say to us, keep going. I must do more. My friends, it's time to take time to be. I'm certain that you can be creative in finding places in your life, times in your life, and opportunities to retreat. Here are a few questions you might want to discuss. Someone can write them down. Do you feel a need to retreat? What are some ways that you can retreat? What scriptures can you use as a focus for your retreating?